Welcome to part 3 of Colonial Society. Now we're going to take a look at the Salem witch trials. In January of 1692, the small town of Salem, outside of Boston, Massachusetts, led by Minister Samuel Parris, was having a problem. Samuel Parris was confronted by the fact that his own daughter, Betty Parris, and her cousin, Abigail Williams, were both acting very strangely. They would dash about or bark like dogs or fall over or play or just start babbling incoherently, right? Before Samuel Parris knew it, a total of 6 girls were afflicted with these kind of fits. And he became really perplexed. What is causing this affliction, right? And then, of course, he said, perhaps it is the work of the devil, right? And this is a beginning of a series of unfortunate events that ultimately are going to lead to the execution of 20 people, the arrest of hundreds, and dozens more that will languish in jails awaiting trial, some of them actually dying in jail or going insane, right? This is a series of just unfortunate events, right, that were caused by the Puritan understandings on an active and devious devil working in the realm of the living. An ongoing war with the Native Americans, right? The continuous strife with and conflicts with the Native Americans, economic difficulties that were going on in the region at the time, strife within the congregation, personal jealousies and vendettas, and, well, old-fashioned rebellious teenage boredom, right? So, after the girls began acting strangely, a neighbor of Samuel Parris by the name of Mary Sibley suggested a solution. She approached Samuel Parris's slave, a man named John, and said, this is what you need to do. You need to bake a cake using urine from Betty and Abigail, right? So you make a urine cake and feed it to the dog, because dogs are often used by witches as familiars, right, to do devilish deeds. And so if you feed them this urine cake, it'll pull the devil out, right? Did it work? Well, of course not. It didn't work, right? What it did do is it infuriated Samuel Parris. He'll tell Mary Sibley, he says, you are going to the devil for help against the devil. So he finally goes and speaks to a local physician named William Griggs and another minister named John Hale, and collectively the three of them decide that clearly the cause of these afflicted girls has to be witchcraft. By late February 1692, 12-year-old Ann Putnam and William Griggs's niece Elizabeth Hubbard were also showing symptoms of being bewitched, right? Ann Putnam's father, Thomas Putnam, pressed his daughter, said, what is causing this affliction? And she named 3 people. She named Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and a Indian slave working for Samuel Parris named Tituba. Right? These 3 women would be called in to be questioned on February 29th, 1692. Right? All 3 of them were ordered to appear in front of Justice of the Peace John Hathorne. Right? When they got there, the afflicted girls were there too, and they identified Sarah Good, who was kind of an outsider of the community, as the one who had bewitched them. She immediately denied the charge. I had nothing to do with these girls. And they immediately began to twist and contort and act like they were in pain, and setting a pattern for things that were to come, right? Others began to come forward and giving testimony, talking about cheese and butter that had mysteriously gone rancid, or animals that were born with deformities, or anything that they can associate to witchcraft, and, of course, these women, right? After the examinations, the questionings, Good and Osborne were brought back in to be stripped down and examined by Salem's innkeeper's wife to see if they had any marks. Moles or any other blemishes were marks where you'd been touched by the devil and signs of you being bewitched, right? But the real star here is Tituba, right? She is going to provide the real drama of the day, because she at first denied these charges that she was a witch, but when she realized that she was likely to be made the scapegoat for all of these things going on, she decided to confess. She came forward, she said, yes, you're right, I was approached by a man from Boston who asked me to sign in his book. It was probably Satan. And then she claimed that her and 4 other witches including Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, had flown around Salem on poles, right? I guess they didn't have any broomsticks. She claimed that she was a reluctant witch, though. That, for example, that when she was ordered by Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne to kill Parris's son, she tried to run to Father Parris for counsel, but was blocked by the devil himself, right? She also claimed that she was struck deaf when she resisted Good and Osborne's commands to torture the girls, right? Now, this is going to set another pattern to follow, because what happened here and what Tuba did was she saved her own life, right? Because the moment she confessed and started giving testimony, she ceased to be one of the accused and became one of the witnesses. You now have become valuable, and that's what's going to save her. Now, unfortunately, this revolution by Tituba led these people to believe that they were on the right track, that they were indeed catching witches, right? And just kind of set in motion this obsession for witch hunting in the community. Soon after, these girls began identifying more people, naming more people that they believed were witches, ones that had appeared in front of them in specter form, right? And this is something that wasn't even often accepted in European society as far as evidence, spectral evidence. This means you don't even have to be there to be accused, right? For example, let's say, she's a witch. She bewitched me on the 5th of February. And the woman says, well, I couldn't have. I was in Boston that entire week. Yes, you were, but your spectral form appeared, and your specter bewitched me. Need not be present to be guilty, right? And this is going to lead to some pretty ridiculous charges, and probably the most ridiculous is Dorothy Good. Dorothy Good is the daughter of Sarah Good, right? Dorothy Good is going to be accused of being a witch, of practicing witchcraft. Now, here's the thing about Dorothy Good. She is 4 years old. She's accused of being a witch, and she's thrown in jail. And she'll be held in jail for the next 8 months. She will then also see her mother, who is also in jail, get removed and dragged off to the gallows. Her mother, Sarah Good, will be hung. And obviously, the ultimate result is that she will go insane, right? The number of inflicted girls are going to increase too. There's now 7 of them, and their performances are becoming more and more polished and convincing, and things just steamroll out of control. You're going to have 140 plus people accused of witchcraft. Some of them are just accused for defending those that are witches. Like, for example, a guy comes in and says, this is my wife. She can't be a witch. I've been married to her for 20 years. And they would say, well, of course you would say that because, well, you're a witch too. And now you're accused as well. Many of these people realized that if they confessed and became witnesses, then they could save their own life, right? The jails were overcrowded. And as I mentioned before, you're going to end up with 20 people executed, most of them by hanging and none of them by burning. The jails were getting so full that the governor of Massachusetts, William Phipps, decided that he was going to create a special court to deal with this. It was called a court of oia intermiter, which literally means the court that hears and decides. In charge of it, he placed a friend of Minister Cotton Mather, a staunch witch hunter by the name of William Stoughton, right? And William Stoughton would allow all confessions as credible. He would allow the touch test in trials. That was where the afflicted would be, the accused would be told to touch the afflicted, and if the afflicted stopped convulsing, that was because you're guilty, right? He actually encouraged the submission of spectral evidence. He allowed for physical examinations for witches' marks, and he even allowed for any hearsay, gossip, or unsupported assertions to be submitted as evidence. Meanwhile, accused witches were not allowed to have legal counsel. They couldn't call on anybody to testify on their behalf. Those people would have to come forward voluntarily. And they weren't allowed any form of legal appeal, right? So the court first convenes on June 2nd, 1692, and the first case they hear is that of Bridget Bishop, right? Bridget Bishop had been accused to be a witch, right? She was a societal outlier. That made her a prime suspect, right? The evidence that was presented against her was, at best, laughable. So she was still convicted and sentenced to death. And she will be actually the first of the individuals hung here during the witch trials, right? But the trials also showed that this was a great way to settle old scores. It wasn't about just getting rid of your social outliers or your eccentrics, right? For example, Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse was a very pious and respected woman in the community, but she was also a member of the Town family, Town being the last name, who had a long-standing feud with the Putnam family. Remember Ann Putnam, the 12-year-old? Right? Well, guess who fingers Rebecca Nurse as a witch? Ann Putnam does, right? The court goes to, or the trial goes to court, right? Again, the evidence produced is ridiculous. Matter of fact, it's so bad that the jury comes back and says, not guilty, right? But Judge Stoughton goes, nope, go back, try again. And he orders them to go and deliberate again. This time realizing that there was only one possible answer. On July 19, 1692, she and 4 others will be convicted and condemned to the gallows, right? One of the more famous of those convicted and killed is going to be that of John Proctor. If you've seen The Crucible, you're familiar with this, right? John Proctor and his wife were both accused of witchcraft. Elizabeth Proctor, right? Now, he had got accused. He was one of those ones that tried to defend his wife, was accused, and therefore got accused himself. The accuser was Elizabeth Booth, right, who testified that a ghost had visited her, and that ghost had told her that John Proctor was a serial killer, right? John Proctor was convicted, and he was hung. Elizabeth Proctor was also convicted, but she wasn't executed because she got what was called reprieve for the belly. She was pregnant. She was pregnant, and therefore the baby's innocent, so she gets to live. But think about this for a minute. She gets to live, but they killed the baby's father, right? Corey Giles, of course, is probably the most interesting of those who were eventually executed during these trials. He will be accused of being a witch. He will spend 5 months in jail. But knowing that if he had gotten convicted that he would lose all his lands, which he had planned to leave to his 2 son-in-laws and his daughters, he refused to stand trial. I refused to stand trial. The punishment for not standing trial was called pene forte et dura. In other words, it literally meaning hard and forceful punishment. It's pressing. They put basically a pallet on you, and they begin stacking stones on top and keep asking you, do you confess? No, right? And then they put more weight on there. Every time they would ask Giles Corey, will you confess to being a witch? He would just reply, more weight. And they continued to do that until September 19th, 1692. He would finally be pressed to death. On the 22nd of September, 1692, Corey's wife, who was also accused along with 7 others, would also be hung. These would be the last victims hung in the witch trials. Ultimately, though, the hysteria will finally fade. Now, some of this was brought about a lot of people just going, wait a minute, this is getting out of control, including Increase Mather, who was the father of Minister Cotton Mather, who began criticizing the trials. Matter of fact, he published a book called Cases of Conscience, which has been referred to as the first American tract on how to use evidence, right? Because he was criticizing the evidence being presented. But I think the real turning point and tipping point for this is when Governor Phipps's wife was accused of being a witch. And at that point, Governor Phipps ordered this to come to a stop. He ordered that all spectral and touching tests be excluded and that all trials be based on exacting clear evidence to show proof. The result of that was subsequent witch trials all led to acquittals. And by May of 1693, all those who still remained in jails accused of being witches were finally released.